Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Understanding the Power of Digital Process Automation, with panelists Todd Lohr from KPMG, Bart Peluso from Blue Prism, and Kevin Spurway from Appian. Today's event will examine the trends and strategies in digital automation, highlighting the customer stories, technologies, and perspectives on different approaches being seen across the industry and how automation and process transform enterprise businesses. We'll be taking questions at the end of the session, so please feel free to utilize the Q&A functionality that you see on the right side of your screen to submit any questions to our panelists. Now, to briefly introduce our speakers, Todd Lohr is a principal within KPMG's technology-enabled transformation practice, specializing in enterprise transformation, process excellence, and process automation. He's an industry thought leader and has led numerous initiatives at Fortune 100 companies and government agencies. Todd leads the U.S. practice for process automation and specializes in enterprise selection, design, and implementation of automation technologies, including BPM, RPA, and cognitive technologies. In addition to his practice responsibilities, Todd is responsible for KPMG's global transformation solutions, including the development of methods, accelerators, and delivery platforms. Bart Peluso leads the global product marketing organization for Blue Prism, the market leader in robotic process automation. Prior to Blue Prism, Bart led product marketing for Cisco's campus LAN switches and spent 18 years in product marketing for hardware, networking, and wireless solutions at Motorola, Dell, and the groundbreaking startup Mesh Networks. Kevin Spurway is Senior Vice President of Marketing, leading Appian's marketing and business development organizations. Prior to Appian, Kevin was the SVP of Marketing at MicroStrategy, where he was responsible for product marketing and product management of the company's analytic solutions. He has held similar senior marketing and corporate development positions at AppleSoft, Appian, and PTC. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today and sharing your perspectives on this important topic. To kick things off, I'd like to ask each of you to give your perspective on what challenges companies are faced with today that digital process automation can help solve. Todd, if you want to start us off here.
Great, thank you. From my perspective, I think that the biggest challenge is really the element of speed, and this manifests its way in a couple of places. One is the complexity of current technology landscapes and a lot of legacy applications. The other is kind of the need to quickly have an agile approach to change the technology stack and to meet kind of the ever-changing perception, or I guess the ever-changing landscape of business needs. And so I think the great thing and what we're seeing in the market is this combination of using, an Appian and a Blue Prism type solution, both a BPM and an RPA together, to be able to address kind of the agility of needing to build, kind of changing requirements across a changing business landscape.
Thanks, Todd. Kevin?
Yeah, hey. Yeah, so this is Kevin speaking, and thanks Rachel and Todd and Bart. It's great to be with you on the call today. The complexity of IT environments today is tremendous. I mean, we're seeing customers with environments. One customer in particular, they've got 200 different ERP systems. They've got 600 systems just in billing and finance alone. The architecture of this organization from a technology perspective is the result of years of diverse product lines running separate businesses, years of merger and acquisition activity, and now the driver with digital transformation is to bring these things together and create common customer experiences. And dealing with that level of complexity is obviously tremendously difficult and tremendously challenging from an IT perspective. So, that's where these technologies, business process management, robotic process automation can really come together and create a level of agility that enables you to surmount some of these difficulties.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And Bart?
Yeah, I think my colleague spoke to the two critical elements, speed and productivity. To take speed to one more granular level down, I think it's the speed of change and the ability to scale. We're seeing insurance companies switch gears with entire human and robotic workforces to change from one campaign to another, or change the way they do business to have a competitive differentiation and, quite frankly, a competitive edge. And we're seeing that across all verticals. It's not just in consumer goods.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bart. And in considering all of these challenges, how are companies today evaluating the risks versus rewards of such projects? Todd?
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's not necessarily just a pure reward versus risk element. A lot of organizations are looking at these not as a single technology, but really a collective set of technologies, and really around the guise of an enterprise transformation, whether it's business model or operating model. A lot of organizations are looking more holistically at end-to-end processes, and with that obviously comes larger rewards, but also larger risk. And I think it's how organizations approach tackling some of their larger challenges in the organization, and have kind of the framework of balancing the two of those, and taking on kind of bite-sized technology projects within the guise of a larger transformation program, and being able to have a very value-centric approach to managing the rewards of those, and understanding not only upfront kind of the business case and the rationale for change, but then also having components along milestones associated to different incremental capability of the technology to make sure that you're achieving those milestones.
Okay, thanks, Todd. And you touched on how you do the right evaluations when you're thinking about these technologies. So if we can go ahead and touch on next, what are the right ways to look at the technologies that organizations are leveraging for digital transformation out there? Kevin?
Part of the challenges that organizations are facing today is that there are so many technologies that are relatively new technologies that they're trying to figure out how to bring them all to bear and operationalize them to actually result in efficiency increase or process improvement or realignment or change of a business model. So the technologies that companies are looking at are capabilities like RPA, like AI, which can take a whole variety of different flavors, ranging from image recognition, potentially OCR, predictive capabilities, speech to text. How do you bring those new capabilities to bear in an improved process? And I think the question that a lot of companies are facing is, how do you approach these technologies? Do you approach them in a one-off fashion? Do you develop a center of excellence around each one individually, or do you look at it more in a holistic way, where you build a center of excellence around what I would consider to be enterprise automation, the idea of bringing these things together? AI, RPA, BPM, Internet of Things is another huge category where there's obviously immense potential for creating new efficiencies and revolutionizing the way that businesses operate. My recommendation would be to think about these things holistically, and in particular, think about how process can really be the thing that ties together a lot of these diverse technologies and enables you to deliver them in an operational way more quickly and with more agility.
Thanks, Kevin. And Todd, Kevin kind of touched on the centers of excellence and how these technologies can be utilized when you pull them together. Wanted to get some of your thoughts on what you've seen in the industry from a consulting perspective, and the types of different technologies that folks are utilizing today.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely with Kevin as far as what we're seeing in the market with our clients. That it's not about implementing a single technology or looking having the hammer looking for the nail, but really looking back across the enterprise and understanding not only the business strategy and how that transcends to the technology stack, but then looking more holistically across the end-to-end value streams and enterprise processes to be able to align the technology better. And then from there, really taking not just a single technology, but really a spectrum of automation technologies. And that's really the fun part of the market today, is there are so many great technologies out there, and evolving very quickly, all the way from basic configuration-based automation to artificial intelligence and everything in between. And we're seeing as a better practice a lot of organizations taking that holistic view, leveraging two core technologies as their building blocks around both robotics and business process management technologies to be able to formulate some of that core technology to build an agile-based platform for automation. But then on top of that, what I think is interesting is being able to start overlaying, other technologies. Kevin referenced a couple, but there are a number of APIs around machine learning and natural language processing, OCR technologies as well, that really the flexibility of the underlying technologies, specifically BPM and RPA, allows you to do that, to be able to build a very flexible technology solution across a number of different technologies. Now, so from a governance perspective, how you actually do, and Rachel, to your point, to scale this at the enterprise, there is a lot of complexity, especially in a very large organization. The market is moving very quickly. The technologies are moving very quickly. So I think a lot of organizations struggle a little bit with understanding more broadly the tech landscape, what's available to them today, what's coming in the next 6 to 12 months and beyond, and how do they actually leverage those technologies. So that's where this concept of a center of excellence is starting to get a lot of play in organizations, where they're creating a centralized group that understands these technologies, is kind of looking up beyond the curve at what's coming and being able to understand how to help the business architect solutions across those different technologies, and having kind of that centralized group that's doing everything from the strategy of what does automation mean to the company, both from a business model and operating model perspective, but then also how do they leverage some of the more disruptive technologies in the market to be able to take advantage of those.
And that's the perfect lead-in for the next question that we have right there, Todd, is as a customer, if you're trying to understand the right way to utilize all these different technologies and all these emerging technologies that are now hitting the market, what can you all tell us about what is the value of having both RPA and BPM as a solution? Why isn't one enough? And how do you really take a look at the evaluation of all the different types of tools that are coming out today?
Yeah, so we're seeing adoption of robotic process automation in all different areas. When we sell a financial organization, we're finding that they're automating HR processes. So the digital workforce is being adopted, but just like a human workforce, and more importantly, integrated with a human workforce, the digital workforce needs processes created, processes that are flexible, that meet all internal and external compliance requirements, and that interact. So if you look at organizations like Appian that does low-code BPM, it really was more of an organic and gravitational pull that brought Appian and Blue Prism together more than a strategic alliance. Because as the digital workforce is adopted, the need for business processes to be created quickly and to be changed quickly and to be flexible becomes more and more important.
Great, thanks, Bart. And Todd, can you touch a little bit more on the differences between the technologies and how they're complementary and folks should be considering it from a holistic perspective of using both?
Yeah. Absolutely. So there are nuances of where you could use both a BPM type solution like Appian as well as a RPA solution like Blue Prism in similar use cases, but at the same time, I think kind of the core at BPM and low-code development platforms is really around their ability to manage end-to-end processes. So thinking more of large processes, workflow, and I think, as Bart summarized as well, it's where the kind of the technology meets the human interaction. And so from that perspective, that's more of a platform play to be able to orchestrate those interactions across a very large value chain that includes a lot of handoffs for steps that may not be automated today or may not make sense to automate today, given the complexity or the human judgment or skill that's required. Longer term, now those could be, you would still have that end-to-end platform of orchestration across the technologies and those processes, but you would be able to change up how you would apply different services or different capabilities around that. Robotics, on the other hand, is more around some of the tasks more specifically. You can string it together more end-to-end, but a lot of times you're seeing robotics being used for more task orientation. So if you think about where you're seeing a lot of uses of the technologies together, think about a customer service example, where you're calling a contact center. It's a very complex customer service where there's multiple touch points within a group. You can use a tool like Appian to be able to orchestrate all of those different touch points, have kind of that 360 view of the customer, and be able to manage that. But then, kind of at the point of making the decision of what you need to do, you can kick off the robot that could actually go to all the back-end systems, update any of the other systems, transpose the data. Kind of having them work together is actually very powerful.
Yeah, and I think from Appian's perspective, we kind of break it down into three major use cases for the two technologies working together. The first, which has kind of already been touched on, is greater end-to-end automation of a sophisticated process that involves both humans and robotic workforce. So basically the goal there is to take the process, to look at it holistically, and then to take people out of doing the repetitive tasks as much as you possibly can and replace those people with the robotic automation capability, so that your human resources are being directed at the higher value-added activities within the organization. So you achieve greater automation by virtue of implementing that technology layer that combines both BPM and RPA. You're bringing greater agility into the process, more flexibility and speed to change, and then you're also instrumenting that process as well. So you get better tracking out of what's actually happening. You get a better ability to assess how both humans and robots are performing tasks. The second use case is a little bit more straightforward. It's more around the idea of almost like a virtual API. So if you've got difficult to access systems and you want to tie those systems into a business process or into an application that you're building using Appian, for example, Blue Prism can come in, RPA can come in that situation and enable you to access let's say it's a green screen system or something like that, be able to interact with that system and integrate with that system in a much more efficient way than you might need to do, than might happen if you had to go down a programmatic path. And then I think finally, there's the use case around improving collaboration and connectivity between both digital and human workflows. So in this situation, you've got a robotic workforce. It's performing a variety of different tasks and activities and processes within existing applications and doing that automatically. But there may be exceptions that flow out of that, and that's where a BPM system like Appian can come in to enable the human engagement on those exceptions that enable you to have again, an automated and repetitive way to handle those situations.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. And now considering those kinds of use cases and the way that the two technologies can work together, if we can take a look at some of the ways that we are seeing companies actually using digital process automation to transform their business. Kevin, if you can hit on a couple examples here.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you a couple examples. So, we're working with a couple customers. One is a very large insurance provider. This is a relatively old company that's been around for over 300 years. There's a lot of history that goes along with that company. They've done a lot of acquisitions. They have a complex IT environment. And, similar to the company that I mentioned before, they're trying to unify their customer experience. They have 22 different systems that are potentially tied into creating a unified customer experience. And in their old model of doing business, they had a front office and a back office. And the front office talked to customers, and then they handed activities and tasks off to the back office, and the back office worked in the systems and did things. And generally, the responsiveness to customer requests and interaction was relatively slow and inefficient. Now they've actually implemented Appian and Blue Prism together. And they've been able to actually organizationally change the way that they work so that there's one organization, there's one front office that is interfaced directly to the customer. There are 35 different requests that customers can make, and those requests have all been fully automated using Appian and Blue Prism. So basically, Appian is invoking Blue Prism workflows, robotic workflows, to complete transactions in these underlying systems, or in many of those underlying systems. So it's a fairly complex digital transformation around improving the customer experience within this insurance company, and it's had a tremendous impact not just on the efficiency and the customer satisfaction, but even organizationally the way that company operates. Another client is actually in a different industry. They have a facilities management tasking system. So they're one of the largest owners and operators of facilities around anywhere, and they're using an old version of SAP to manage some of the data around this. They were told that the business group that's driving this particular project, they were told by the SAP team that it would be a multi-year project, almost a 5-year project, to enable them to integrate the new app that they wanted to build to automate the facilities management tasking with the data that was in SAP. And we were able to offer them a solution that required absolutely no changes to SAP and dramatically accelerated that whole process of being able to connect to SAP and layer this new facilities tasking application over it to enable a modern approach to the way that they manage their business.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kevin. And to kind of extend on that discussion of those very specific examples of how the two technologies can work together, what are some of the other processes that make good candidates for transformation from a business or even an industry perspective? Todd, if you can highlight some of your thoughts around this.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about these technologies specifically, and I think one of the challenges as well, is that it's so applicable to just about every process in every industry and every function within business. So I think that's been part of the adoption challenge. Is it isn't straightforward like an ERP system where here's where I apply it, here's how I do it. Everyone has already done this before me. Here's the lessons learned. And so I think organizations are really just trying to think through where best to apply these technologies. And from that, there's some really interesting use cases that are coming into the market. But I think that the major trends that you're seeing specific to the technologies are, really around kind of where you would apply technology historically, around kind of the cost benefit of doing so, right? So operationally in very large shared services or operation type centers where there's large volume, large resources being applied to solving tasks, you're seeing a lot of adoption of these technologies just from an efficiency play to be able to scale those business operations, do more with less. That's one kind of the operational excellence component of that. So think, kind of finance processes or IT processes, HR processes, supply chain, procurement. You're seeing a lot of use cases within each of those areas specific to both, Appian and Blue Prism, and both of them working kind of in concert with one another. I would say the other major adoption trend that you're seeing in the market more broadly is around customer experience and how you can kind of help drive the customer experience, have that better view of the customer holistically, and improve the experience. Both from an interaction perspective as well as cycle time. A lot of the technologies are being applied to that use case as well, and that's across industry. More specifically, I think the larger adoption areas tend right now to be within financial services. They tend to be an early adopter of most technologies, but specifically within both BPM and robotic process automation, you're seeing probably slightly more adoption there, but a lot of the industries are starting to follow on very quickly with their own specific use cases, specifically around some of their core operations that would be unique to the industry, or more holistic customer-facing or client-facing processes across industry.
I would just add to that. I think we're seeing a lot of the same things. Certainly, financial services and insurance tend to be some of the most active adopters of of these technologies together. Although, the range of use cases is really pretty broad. You can solve a lot of different industry problems and a lot of different process problems horizontally as well. Customer experience, I totally agree. It tends to be a big driver. We've all, in call center in particular, we've all been on the phone with a call center representative where, they need to pause to bring up another system or log into something or hand you off to another associate someplace else. And, in the modern era, as companies are competing on customer service, these organizations are looking to unify that experience and bring it together. And these two technologies, BPM and RPA, really are tailor-made to deliver that type of that underlying unified customer experience and knit things together, even in very, very complex environments with that history of multiple systems and multiple acquisitions and the messy legacy of IT that almost every large company is dealing with. Yeah,
Kevin, I think both Todd and yourself articulated it well as far as the adoption trends being operations-oriented and related to customer experience. Looking at it from an automation perspective, if there was one common thread running through it all, I would say it would be fluctuating operational needs, right? Varying degrees. So we've seen use cases. You mentioned insurance. We have one of the largest insurance providers in the world that just recently shifted its digital workforce from managing accounts and marketing campaigns to fulfilling homeowners policies due to all these hurricanes we're having. So, when you look for where are my fluctuating needs, we have a large medical organization that found the biggest variance, the biggest operational challenge was hospital admissions, and they automated that process. So you can look at Appian to create, launch, and augment that process as needed, and you have a digital workforce behind it meeting compliance to execute on the process. And there are hospitals throughout Europe that have automated hospital admissions, and the admission process scales. Everything gets faster when there's a queue or a line. So I think that's kind of the common thread that we're seeing across these adoption trends of operational and customer experience-oriented digital transformation.
Great, thanks, guys. And now that we've kind of covered those use cases and the right kinds of projects that we're seeing get considered, in what ways can companies decrease their risk factors and maximize their chance of success when they're considering digital transformation projects? Todd, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. I think I mentioned one of the areas before around to the center of excellence, kind of having that central group that for the enterprise understands the technology landscape, understands the business and the requirements and the overarching strategy, and help can support. So I think that is one element of it. I think the two other that I would emphasize on managing risk, apart from picking the right project to start with, making sure that it's impactful to the business yet not something that is really complex, hard to do, and takes a long time. I think you want to right size those first couple projects in this space to make sure that you're providing value, but you're also doing so in months, not years, kind of in time frames. But then really focusing on two overarching factors. One is the change management aspect of this. As you start talking, not just about robotics or BPM, but then even more thinking holistically around automation and other technologies in this space. There is a lot of change aspects to this as far as how you identify kind of the impacted organization and really I know I'm on a call with two of my technology friends here, but it's really not about the technology at the end of the day. It's a lot of times about the organizational impact and the change associated to that, and how you're going to look at the organization, from the processes that you're redesigning, how people interact with those technologies, the processes that could be automated, the impact to the workforce. If you're going to automate a large percent of the workforce, what do you do with the workforce post to that automation? What is the new span of control? What are the new roles, responsibilities of those folks? So there's a lot of organizational impacts that I think a lot of organizations don't really think about until mid or even after the fact. They focus more holistically or initially on the let's implement the technology and here's the benefits of that. But I think it's important that you don't lose sight of some of the organizational impact and the change components of this, and have a very structured plan in place around all the different stakeholders in the organization and what it means and how you're going to get out in front of that from a communication standpoint. The other point to that is also the risk, right? So there is a risk associated to deploying these technologies. If you think about kind of the technology landscape and kind of the world and cyber threats that we live in today, having a very structured and regimented approach to how you manage some of the technology risk associated to using these technologies is going to be important from kind of the onset of the program.
In the RPA space, what we've seen is gradual adoption, most successfully within a center of excellence environment. So there's alternate types of automation technologies. There's what we call the IEEE labels robotic desktop automation, which is recording. Blue Prism is essentially a modeling tool to build out the automation of processes, primarily back office. So what we've seen is some of the largest organizations in the world begin really small, and then from there they expand out. And that can be done at the departmental level or at the COE level. And I think that's an important component of risk mitigation, is to say, okay, we can roll this out, this automated approach at customer management within this small microcosm, and then build out from there. And we're seeing expansion that's really significant, both geographic expansion and expansion horizontally throughout some of these large organizations.
Yeah, I would just add to that from a project perspective. I think these technologies are very well suited to an agile approach, an agile development methodology. Getting business and IT working closely together to implement, to create the vision, implement the solution, starting small with an MVP type of an approach, and then gradually building off of that. These are all approaches that work very well with BPM and RPA together. That being said, I think beyond that context, it's okay to be thinking about big problems. It's just how you approach those problems. It's best suited to an agile approach as opposed to a big, massive engagement. But have a bold vision. Realize that these technologies are very flexible, very complementary. They can solve a lot of problems together. And then, beyond that, find an experienced partner that can really help navigate you through, the agile approach while keeping that big picture in mind that's demonstrated success in these types of projects. Those are all different things that I think can contribute to risk reduction.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen, for all of those perspectives. Now we'd actually like to open it up and invite you to answer some of the questions from our audience today. So one of the questions we received is, are single technologies capable of enterprise digital transformation, or are multiple technologies always required or desired?
I'll go ahead and start with that. I think it depends on how you want to define digital transformation. To me, that those terms are fairly all-encompassing. So I would see it as kind of the better practice would be multiple technologies. With that said, I have a lot of clients that are using just Appian or Blue Prism, BPM, RPA more singularly within a set of a number of areas and getting a lot of transformative value from that as well. But I think there's an exponential power of kind of combining some of the technologies together to be able to solve for more complex business challenges and kind of combining those together. So if I were to look at kind of the phrase digital transformation, to me that would speak to multiple technologies, even beyond some of the automating technologies that we spoke about on the call today. Bart, Kevin, interested in your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. I think integration is absolutely critical, that the technologies that you're rolling out organization-wide to drive these different digital strategies must be flexible enough to integrate, not just with some of these other cutting-edge technologies that we mentioned on this call, like OCR, artificial intelligence, but also must be able to integrate with your legacy technologies. So yes, it's more than one, but flexibility is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and I would also agree with that. I think it's important when you think about digital transformation to really be looking at it not as a as a thing you do and then you're done, but rather as a continuing process that really in some ways never ends. And as a result of that, you have to be thinking about approaches that can also accommodate the future, right? So as new technologies continue to emerge, and there's obviously a lot of technology change right now, you may want to embrace those technologies. You may want to switch from one AI vendor to another AI vendor, for example. And you need to be thinking about how to implement a backbone that's open and can accommodate those changes in a flexible way. So definitely, I think a multidimensional technology approach to digital transformation is required.
Great, thanks. And this next one, I think Kevin or Bart, you guys can kind of address. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Appian and Blue Prism partnership and how customers can benefit from it?
Sure. So I'll take a crack at that. Appian and Blue Prism obviously have come together because we sense that we know that there is tremendous synergy in the two solutions. Appian is incorporating Blue Prism as a product in our portfolio. We've integrated it very tightly with Appian, and we're able to deliver an integrated solution to our customers that leverages the best of what Appian and Blue Prism can both bring together as leaders in their respective spaces. So we've invested in the integration from a technology perspective, and in addition to that, we're supporting it as a single point of contact from a support and implementation and training perspective as well.
Yes, I think there were close to 1,000 people at Appian World, and these were companies that were using Appian to design, execute, manage, and optimize their processes. So essentially they're building, they're launching, and they're changing apps as needed using low-code development. Well, now there's an element of automation built into that, whereas when you're building out that process, then the question becomes, what components of it can we automate, right? What components that are tangential to that process can we automate? And that's what we do. We easily automate the repetitive tasks with a successful digital workforce. The connector that enables Blue Prism to work with Appian is live today, and there are customers using it.
Okay, great. There are so many great questions coming in right now. We're going to try to get through as many as we can. The next one here is, what are the risks and rewards of adopting BPM, RPA, and AI as it relates to the drastic changes that it will pose employee, societal skill sets, and competencies? How will these skills change over time? And strategically, how will CEOs need to address this shift? What are the reputational, operational, and regulatory risks you foresee as these technologies disrupt the future of work?
Wow. I was going to say from a reputation perspective, yes, there is risks involved with bringing in and deploying new technologies as it relates to reputation and regulation. I could speak to those two and then pass to some of my colleagues here. As it relates to reputation, Blue Prism has been adopted, and I mean over a period of more than a decade that we've been productized and working with. Right now we have 50 of the 100 largest financial institutions in the world. And they lower that risk by starting small. They start automating small processes and work in a form of a think tank, and then roll it out from a broad perspective. And it's built some careers in the financial market as opposed to damaging any. So I think from a reputational standpoint, you want to begin small and then build out. From a regulation perspective, at least as it relates to RPA, everything needs to be captured, right? That's what regulational bodies like HIPAA in the medical community or Sarbanes-Oxley is about. It's about collecting the data of the transaction. So inherent in the design of Blue Prism is we're capturing every iota of every transaction of every process. And then because that's available, that's how we got our HIPAA accreditation and clearance on Sarbanes-Oxley. So from a regulation standpoint, first and foremost, you have to involve IT at all levels and get a thorough understanding of what the internal compliance requirements are. And then as you set up and automate your processes, ensure that that data is captured, and thus you'll meet all your not only internal but also external regulation requirements.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think that this is a great question, and you're starting to get a lot more companies starting to think about this, especially if you start thinking about not just, RPA, BPM, but collectively the technology that's coming down the pipe as far as automation and what that's going to do. Many are coining this the fourth industrial revolution. A lot of studies suggest that 50% of work that is in the U.S. today could be automated with technologies that exist today. So if you start reading, a lot of the research and the exponential growth curve associated with these technologies and all those factors coming together, a lot of experts in the field suggest that this is going to be a very large disruption, if not the largest disruption we're going to see in our professional lives. And so as a result of that, interestingly enough, you are getting more executive leaders, kind of addressing that could versus should of automation. And I really see this as that next the next view of corporate responsibility and sustainability is going to be partially around understanding, each organization's obligation to its own workforce and to society, and how they're going to make some of the ethical decisions around how fast they should automate and what they're going to do with the workforce. What is their own obligation to the workforce to be able to bring people up and upskill them into the jobs that are going to be in here for the next 5 years and beyond, and look at our existing workforce and how they're going to kind of steer their organization through that. I think that's top of mind in a lot of executives starting to think through that now. How organizations are going to do that, I think, it's not too different from what organizations have done in the past as far as kind of having that kind of define standards around their corporate and social responsibility and making some of those decisions around those. A lot of organizations are starting to actually formulate some policies around that and think through, from a technology perspective, what are these technologies and what does that mean to their organization more strategically, but then also what does it mean to their workforce? A number of our clients have, at the executive level, a number of working groups that are defining kind of that workforce that's 5 to 10 years out, what that looks like and how they're going to transition the workforce that they have today to the workforce of the future.
Great. And then the next one is, companies with legacy IT face a mammoth task of implementing RPA across different business units. It probably requires a complete overhaul of IT. What do you suggest is worth the ROI in investing in a huge sum instead of just a narrow project?
So actually, the way Blue Prism has been designed, it's to work across legacy systems. So we automate processes in mainframe, through Linux, through Windows, through web UIs. So really our customer base has not up-leveled their legacy systems in the initial adoption of RPA. We have not seen that. There's very few exceptions. Apple iOS is one. We don't automate in that environment. But across even AS400s and mainframes, we're creating processes, or our customers rather, are creating processes or automating back office tasks, across those heterogeneous environments. So we really haven't seen too much up-leveling. Now, when you look at digital transformation, organization-wide, and the adoption of artificial intelligence and machine-to-machine learning and all that, then obviously there's more of an overhaul. But for basic RPA, no, we work fine in a mainframe environment. And as a matter of fact, that's what the majority of our customers are working with in the financial and insurance markets.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. I think RPA as a technology is extremely friendly to legacy infrastructure. Ultimately, it's a technology that I think is very effective at preserving and extending existing investments in legacy technologies. It enables you to keep them running for a longer period of time, while at the same time, creating those efficiencies around automation that otherwise wouldn't be possible, and tying into newer systems of engagement that support some of these digital transformation initiatives. So I think in some ways it's less of a dramatic overhaul as it is a technology that helps accommodate the existing infrastructure.
Okay, great. Next question is, if you want to create a joint COE for enterprise automation, what skill sets should the team possess?
Wow, that is a great question. I'm trying to think of our customer base. I believe the majority, if not all of them, had the COEs developed in some form or fashion. They were just using human resources and then adopted the digital workforce. But in developing a center of excellence as it relates to automation, I think that there's an element of getting buy-in for automation as a technology that up-levels the human worker and doesn't replace the human worker. And that's what we've seen across our customer base. Blue Prism actually has part of the installation, the deployment process addresses human-robot behavior. It's a component within our, say, 3-month installation process where we actually address that. So I think that's one element. When you roll out automation, you have to be really clear what the purpose is and communicate that across your organization, and that includes your partner companies and your stakeholders, that, hey, we're driving digital transformation here, we're increasing agility, we're increasing flexibility, and we're making change easy. We're not simply automating to lower costs. I think that's at least one critical component, and there's probably several others as it relates to building a center of excellence from the ground up with a focus on automation. But hopefully that's at least a starting point for us on that question.
Yeah, I would just add that from a roles perspective, it varies, and sometimes I think where a lot of organizations get stuck is defining, where it sits in the organization, who owns it. Those are very naturally the first questions around the COE. I think ultimately, though, the better practice here is you do need to have some kind of structures around that, but at the same time, a lot of time it is more of a matrix organization where you're not going to recreate an IT security risk control group, but they absolutely need to be part of the COE as it relates to setting up risk standards and policies around how you're going to use these technologies. Change management, communications, program management, value management. The just kind of the overall business analysis. There are a lot of roles from what is the strategy of these automations, the architecture around them, the governance and how I maintain and manage them. So a lot of organizations pull from a matrix of people that exist in the organization today. Some centralize them, some choose to keep that more of a matrix organization. So it varies on the existing skills and capabilities that you have in the organization, the size and scope of what you want to do with the COE, and the overarching strategy of that as well.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, we've seen over the last couple of years proliferation of organizations that are structured specifically to engage in digital transformation activities within companies. We see titles like VP or Director of Digital Transformation. And those organizations tend to be multidisciplinary. They tend to involve people who are technology people, developers, IT people from a security perspective, as well as the business people and the stakeholders in these transformations. And I think this is a very similar thing where you're bringing together that multidisciplinary approach. The process experts are there. The outside expertise from trusted partners is there. The DevOps people are participating as well. So, it really is a situation where you bring together a diverse team and you look at ways to apply these technologies to improve enterprise automation.
Okay, great. And then we will ask one final question before we get the final thoughts of our panelists. And we had a lot of great questions that we didn't get a chance to get to. We will have a follow-up from the perspective of all of our speakers that we will send out to everyone. But this last question, Kevin, is probably best answered by you. The low code that is presented by Appian, what does it refer to? What is it that is coded in BPM? Is it the process flow? Is it the automation of the process?
Yeah, so it's a great question. There are certain things within our technology that basically rely in small ways on a scripting capability that we have within Appian. So most of what you can do in Appian and to a certain extent, you can certainly build applications in Appian without any code at all. You can design forms in Appian without any code. You can build out processes without any code. There are certain situations where you may want to leverage code. For example, if you're integrating with third-party systems, or if you want to implement a certain piece of logic using a snippet of code. So there's a level of flexibility there. And that's where the terminology low code comes in. The progression of technology as we kind of move forward in time, going from from our history is to consistently reduce the amount of code that it takes to build more and more powerful applications using Appian, and that march of progress will continue. So, for example, earlier this year we released capability for business-centric rules design, where we took all of the capability that previously you might have implemented to create a series of logical rules and gateways using code, and we turned that into an interface that is effectively a drag-and-drop interface usable by a business user to define very complex logic. And things like that will continue to kind of surface as we go forward with the trajectory of Appian development and innovation in the product.
Okay, great. Thank you. And that brings us to the top of the hour here. So I would just like to ask for each of our panelists to give their final thoughts before we go. And again, we will have a follow-up process to answer the rest of these questions that got asked today. But Todd, why don't we go ahead and start with your final thoughts?
Great, thank you. To me, I think it's having both Appian and Blue Prism on the call and sharing their perspective reconfirms the fact that moving forward, as you start thinking about technologies around automation, that it's really an ecosystem play of how you start thinking about kind of collectively the technology together and how you can solve more end-to-end or have more transformative value in the processes. The other point, that was shared earlier was, don't lose sight of the organizational impact and what it's going to do kind of longer term and strategically to the organization, and start thinking about that today and championing those conversations within the enterprise.
Kevin, would you like to give us your final thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I think I guess my final thought would be to develop an automation strategy and think about that at an enterprise level. I think that companies that are organizing to look at this set of technologies holistically, certainly BPM and RPA together, but also technologies like IoT and machine learning, AI, those organizations that look at them together are, I think, going to create better outcomes than those who are lagging behind, not as proactive about adoption of these technologies and experimentation with these technologies, or those companies that are really looking at these technologies in a more siloed approach or in isolation. So I'd recommend bringing them together, thinking holistically, and again, having a broader vision for how these technologies can be used to solve a variety of automation problems within the organization.
Then Bart, your final thoughts.
Yeah, it is a very exciting time. These new technologies are evolving, faster than we can adopt them. Whether it's OCR, artificial intelligence, M2M. My suggestion is dream big. Think of what you can do if you had really an unlimited digital workforce, right? And you had a blank sheet and could quickly create and change processes, right? Don't be intimidated by the new technologies. You don't have to acquire them in aggregate, but you can look at business process management, robotic process automation as tools to start you down your organization's journey.
Great, thank you. And we'd like to thank everyone for your time and participation on today's call. Again, for any of the questions that we were unable to answer on the broadcast, we will be following up with more information. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.